The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Magnolia Cafe, casting a warm golden glow over the checkered linoleum floor and the worn wooden booths that lined the walls of the Savannah, Georgia diner. The air carried the comforting aroma of sizzling bacon brewing coffee and the faint sweetness of the cafe's famous peach cobbler cooling on a rack behind the counter. At 60 years old, Clara Thompson moved through the breakfast rush with the ease of someone who'd spent 35 years navigating these tables. Her graying hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her apron, slightly frayed at the edges, bore the stains of countless shifts. Her hazel eyes, sharp and kind, scanned the room, noting the regulars, a group of retirees debating politics over pancakes, a young couple sharing a milkshake, and a construction worker savoring his eggs before the day's labor. Clara's smile was genuine, offered equally to every soul who walked through the glass doors, whether they wore tailored suits or dusty work boots. She'd served mayor's musicians and the occasional tourist, drawn by the cafe's reputation for Southern hospitality, but to her, they were all just folks looking for a warm meal and a moment's comfort. On this crisp October Tuesday, though, something caught her attention, pulling her from the rhythm of refilling coffee mugs and clearing plates. In booth 12, near the window overlooking Abercorn Street, a little girl sat alone, her small frame hunched over a barely touched plate of waffles. Her dark blonde hair fell in loose waves around her face, and her fingers twisted rhythmically, a repetitive motion that Clara recognized instantly. The girl, no more than 9, had autism. Clara had seen the signs before, in the way her eyes darted nervously and the soft hum she made under her breath. Her name was Lily Harper, a regular at the cafe with her father, though Clara had only learned her name from overhearing conversations. Today, Lily's green eyes were brimming with tears, her shoulders trembling as she tried to make herself small, invisible. Clara's heart clenched a familiar ache that took her back to her own son Jacob, who'd faced his own battles with epilepsy as a child. She knew that look, the one that said the world felt too big, too cruel, too loud. Across the room in the adjacent booth, 3 middle school boys, maybe 13 or 14, snickered behind their hands, their trays cluttered with half-eaten burgers and fries. Their voices, low but sharp, carried just enough for Clara to catch fragments of their conversation. "Look at her hands," one whispered, mimicking Lily's, stimming with exaggerated flaps. "What a freak," another added, his laugh sharp as a blade. The third boy, with a baseball cap tilted backward, made a face, contorting his features in a cruel parody of Lily's expression. Clara's blood simmered, her grip tightening on the coffee pot she held. She'd seen bullies before, kids, adults. It didn't matter the age. They all wore the same smugness, the same careless cruelty. She glanced at Lily's father, Nathan Caldwell, seated across from his daughter in booth 12. He was a man in his early 40s with sharp cheekbones and a tailored navy suit that screamed wealth. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his eyes, fixed on his phone, were oblivious to the scene unfolding 3 feet away. Nathan's voice was clipped urgent as he spoke into his earpiece, something about stock prices and a merger deadline. Clara recognized the type, successful, driven, probably a good man at heart, but drowning in his own world. She'd seen him before, always rushing Lily through meals, checking his watch, his mind clearly elsewhere. Today he hadn't even noticed the tears streaking his daughter's face, or the way she flinched at the boy's laughter. Clara set the coffee pot down on the counter, her movements deliberate, and wiped her hands on her apron. She'd raised Jacob through years of seizures, hospital visits, and the judgmental stares of strangers who didn't understand why he couldn't just act normal. She knew the weight of a child's pain when the world turned its back. Without hesitation, she walked to the boys' table, her steps steady, her voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen," she said, resting her hands on her hips. "I need you to stop what you're doing right now." The ringleader, the one with the backward cap, looked up, his smirk faltering under Clara's unflinching gaze. "We're just eating, lady," he said, his tone dripping with defiance. Clara didn't budge. She'd faced down worse than cocky teenagers in her years at the cafe, drunk patrons entitled businessmen, even a would-be robber once. "You're hurting a little girl who's done nothing to you," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd raised a son through hardship. "You can either show some respect, or you can take your breakfast elsewhere." The boys exchanged glances, the bravado draining from their faces. The ringleader muttered something under his breath, but the mocking stopped their attention, shifting awkwardly to their food. Clara gave them a final look, then turned back to Lily. Sliding into the booth across from the girl, Clara softened her expression. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said gently, her southern drawl warm as the morning sun. "I'm Clara. What's your name?" Lily looked up, her green eyes wide with surprise, a tissue crumpled in her hand. "I'm Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Those boys, they were laughing at me." Clara's throat tightened. She reached across the table, not touching Lily, but offering her presence. "I know, honey. They were wrong to do that. You're doing just fine sitting here being you." Lily's lips trembled, but she nodded her fingers, slowing their restless dance. Clara noticed a small sketchbook tucked beside Lily's plate, its edges worn from use. "Do you like to draw?" she asked, hoping to shift the girl's focus. Lily's face brightened slightly, and she nodded again, more eagerly this time. "I draw animals," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Cats and birds and turtles," Clara smiled, sensing an opening. "Turtles, huh? I bet you make them look real special. Can I see?" Lily hesitated, then slid the sketchbook toward Clara, flipping it open to a page filled with vibrant drawings, a tabby cat with whiskers like delicate threads, a cardinal mid-flight, a turtle with a shell patterned like a mosaic. Clara's heart swelled. "These are beautiful, Lily. You've got a real gift." Across the booth, Nathan's voice cut through, sharp and impatient. "Lily, we need to go. I've got a board meeting in 30 minutes. He hadn't looked up from his phone, his fingers tapping out a message as he spoke. Lily's face fell, her shoulders slumping again. "But Daddy, I'm not done with my waffles," she said, her voice small, almost pleading. Nathan glanced at his watch, a sleek silver thing that probably cost more than Clara's car. "Come on, kiddo. You've had enough. We're running late." Clara watched the exchange, her chest aching with recognition. She'd seen this dance before, parents too busy to notice the small moments that meant everything to their kids. She'd been that parent once, rushing through Jacob's childhood, missing his quiet triumphs because she was working double shifts to pay medical bills. She wanted to say something to shake Nathan out of his bubble, but she held back, knowing words wouldn't reach him yet. Instead, she focused on Lily. "How about this?" she said, pulling a pencil from her apron pocket. "Why don't you draw me a turtle right now? I'll hang it up behind the counter, show it off to all my customers." Lily's eyes lit up a spark of joy, breaking through her sadness. She grabbed the pencil and began sketching her movements, careful but confident. Nathan finally ended his call, his earpiece dangling, as he looked around, his expression a mix of irritation and exhaustion. For the first time, he seemed to notice Lily's tear-streaked face, the way her hands trembled as she drew. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, his tone softening, though it still carried the edge of a man used to fixing problems quickly. Lily didn't look up, her focus on the turtle taking shape on the page. "Those boys were making fun of me," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said I'm weird." Nathan's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the boys' table, where they were now packing up to leave, their laughter replaced by uneasy silence under Clara's earlier warning. "What boys?" he asked, his voice low, a mix of confusion and dawning guilt. Clara, still seated across from Lily, met Nathan's gaze. "The ones over there," she said, nodding toward the now quiet trio. "They were mocking her, Mr. Caldwell. She was upset, and I stepped in." Nathan's face flushed, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his features. "I was right here," he said, almost to himself. "Why didn't she tell me?" Clara's expression softened, but her words were direct. "She's a brave girl, but kids like Lily feel things deeply. They need us to notice even when they don't speak up." Nathan leaned back in the booth, his polished exterior cracking. He looked at Lily, really looked at her, and saw the hurt in her posture, the way she clung to her sketchbook like a lifeline. Clara stood smoothing her apron and picked up the coffee pot again. "She's got a beautiful heart, Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of her own hard-earned wisdom. "But hearts like hers need extra care. They break a little easier." Nathan didn't respond, his eyes fixed on Lily's drawing, a turtle with a shell full of swirling patterns. Clara moved back to her other customers, her steps steady, but her mind heavy. She'd seen enough families come through these doors to know that moments like this could change everything or nothing at all. It depended on whether Nathan was ready to listen, to see his daughter not as a responsibility to manage, but as a person to cherish. As she refilled a trucker's coffee at the counter, she kept an eye on booth 12, where Lily was showing Nathan her sketch, her voice brighter now, describing the turtle's imaginary home. Nathan's face softened, but his phone buzzed again, and Clara saw the familiar pull of his world threatening to drag him back. She wondered what it would take to make him stay present, to make him see the daughter who needed him more than his empire did. For now, she'd done what she could, a small act of kindness, a moment of protection for a child who reminded her so much of her own. But as the breakfast rush picked up and the cafe filled with the clatter of plates and voices, Clara felt a quiet hope that this morning might be the start of something new for Lily and her father. The hum of Magnolia Cafe had settled into the mid-morning lull, with only a few stragglers lingering over coffee and newspapers. Clara Thompson wiped down the counter, her hands moving in practiced circles, though her thoughts lingered on booth 12, where Lily Harper and her father, Nathan Caldwell, had been just moments ago. The little girl's tearful confession about the boys mocking her still echoed in Clara's mind, as did Nathan's stunned expression when he realized he'd missed his daughter's pain. She'd seen that look before, parents blindsided by their own absence, their love buried under the weight of schedules and ambition. Clara knew better than to judge too harshly. She'd been there herself years ago when her son Jacob's epilepsy had demanded more of her than she thought she could give. Back then, she'd worked double shifts at this very diner to cover his medical bills, often missing the quiet moments when he needed her most. Now at 60, with Jacob grown and managing his condition, Clara carried those regrets like a soft ache, a reminder to notice the small things, like the way Lily's fingers danced nervously or the way Nathan's eyes flickered with guilt. Outside, the Savannah sun climbed higher, bathing Abercorn Street in a warm October glow. Nathan and Lily hadn't left the cafe immediately after Clara's intervention. Instead, Nathan had lingered, watching Lily finish her waffle, her small bites deliberate, as if savoring the rare moment of her father's attention. Clara had kept her distance, serving a couple of tourists at the counter, but she'd caught Nathan's glance, a mix of gratitude and unease, like a man who'd just been handed a truth he wasn't ready to hold. When they finally left, Lily clutched her sketchbook, her steps lighter, while Nathan's phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket. Clara wondered if he'd answer it the second they stepped outside, slipping back into the world that kept him from his daughter. She hoped not, but she'd seen enough hurried parents to know how hard it was to break that cycle. Nathan, meanwhile, guided Lily toward his sleek black SUV parked across the street, his mind a tangle of emotions. The merger with Apex Dynamics was teetering, his board demanding updates, and his inbox was a minefield of urgent emails. Yet for the first time in months, those pressures felt secondary. Lily's words. They said, "I'm weird," played on a loop in his head, each syllable a jab at his conscience. How had he missed it? He'd been right there 3 feet away, negotiating a deal worth hundreds of millions, while his 9-year-old daughter endured cruelty alone. He glanced at Lily, who was buckling herself into the back seat, her sketchbook open on her lap, her pencil tracing the outline of a bird. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Lily nodded, her eyes on her drawing, but her silence spoke volumes. Nathan started the engine, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. He thought of Clara, the waitress who'd seen what he hadn't, who'd stepped in with a firmness and kindness that made him feel both grateful and ashamed. She'd called Lily brave, said her heart needed extra care. Nathan didn't know what that meant, not really, but the words stuck, heavy and undeniable. Back at the cafe, Clara was clearing booth 12 when she found a crumpled napkin tucked under Lily's plate, a tiny doodle of a turtle scrawled on it, signed with a careful Lily H. She smiled, slipping it into her apron pocket, a small treasure to add to the collection of memories she'd gathered over 35 years. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to Jacob, now 32, living in Atlanta, with a job at a library and a quiet life he'd built despite his challenges. She remembered the nights she'd come home too tired to ask about his day, the school events she'd missed because of a late shift. Those moments haunted her, but they'd also taught her to see the kids like Lily, the ones who needed someone to notice them. She hoped Nathan would take that moment in the cafe and do something with it, but she wasn't naive. Change was hard, especially for a man like Nathan, someone who, from the look of his suit and the urgency in his voice, carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Nathan drove toward their home in Savannah's historic district, a sprawling Victorian with wraparound porches and manicured gardens. Lily was quiet, her pencil scratching softly against the paper. "What are you drawing now?" he asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "A sparrow," she said, her voice small but clear. "It lives in a tree by my school, but the other kids throw rocks at it." Nathan's stomach twisted. "Why didn't you tell me about the kids at school?" "Lily?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. Lily shrugged, her eyes fixed on her sketch. "You're always busy, Daddy. I didn't want to bother you." The words hit Nathan like a punch. He pulled into the driveway, his mind racing. He thought of his ex-wife Emily, who'd warned him during their divorce that he was losing Lily not to custody battles, but to his own absence. He'd dismissed her, convinced his work was for Lily's future, providing the best therapies, the top private school, a trust fund that would secure her for life. But Clara's words echoed, "Hearts like hers break a little easier." He realized with a clarity that made his chest ache that Lily didn't need his money. She needed him. Inside the house, Lily settled at the kitchen table, her sketchbook open, while Nathan paced his phone, buzzing with notifications from his assistant Claire. The merger was at a critical juncture. A meeting with Apex's CEO was scheduled in 2 hours. He glanced at Lily, who was coloring the sparrow's wings with a soft blue crayon, her lips moving in a quiet hum. For the first time, he noticed how her movements, so often a source of worry for him, a reminder of her autism, were also a kind of poetry, deliberate and expressive. He thought of Clara, her steady presence, her story about her son. She'd mentioned Jacob, how she'd learned to slow down for him. Nathan didn't know the details, but he felt the weight of her experience the way it had shaped her into someone who could see Lily's pain when he couldn't. He made a decision impulsive but certain. He picked up his phone and texted Claire, canceled the 2 p.m. with Apex, reschedule for tomorrow. Then he turned off his notifications, something he hadn't done in years. "Lily," he said, sitting across from her, "how about we do something fun today? Just you and me." Lily looked up, her green eyes wide with surprise, searching his face for a trick. "Really?" she asked, her voice cautious. "What about your meeting?" Nathan forced a smile, ignoring the knot of anxiety in his gut. "You're more important," he said, and, though the words felt foreign, he meant them. "What do you want to do?" Lily's face lit up a rare, unguarded smile that made Nathan's heart ache with how much he'd missed. "Can we go to Forsyth Park?" she asked. "I want to fly my kite." Nathan nodded, remembering the bright red kite they'd bought last summer, still untouched in the garage. "Let's do it," he said, standing. "Grab your jacket." Forsyth Park was a short drive away, its sprawling oaks draped in Spanish moss, the fountain at its center, bubbling under the midday sun. Nathan helped Lily untangle the kite's strings, his fingers clumsy compared to her careful ones. The park was alive with joggers, dog walkers, and kids chasing each other across the grass. But Lily seemed oblivious, her focus on the kite as she ran, her laughter bright and unguarded. Nathan ran with her, holding the spool, his dress shoes sinking into the soft earth. The kite caught the wind, soaring briefly before dipping and crashing into the grass. Lily giggled undeterred, and Nathan found himself laughing too, a sound he barely recognized. For an hour, they chased the kite, their failures and small successes blending into something joyful. Nathan's phone stayed silent in his pocket, and for the first time in months he felt present, tethered to his daughter's smile rather than his company's demands. Back at Magnolia Cafe, Clara was finishing her shift when her co-worker Marla, a young waitress with a penchant for gossip, leaned over the counter. "You hear about that guy in the suite? Word is, he's some big-shot tech guy, owns half of Silicon Valley or something." Clara raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. She'd guessed Nathan was someone important, but it didn't change her view of him. "He's just a dad who needs to pay attention," she said, tucking Lily's napkin doodle into a small box under the counter where she kept mementos from her years at the cafe. Marla shrugged, moving on to another topic, but Clara's thoughts stayed with Lily. She hoped the girl's father would keep looking, keep seeing her. As she locked up for the day, she glanced at booth 12, picturing Lily's small frame, her sketchbook, her quiet strength. That evening, Nathan and Lily sat on their porch, the kite now tangled but treasured, resting beside them. Lily was drawing again, this time a picture of the park, the kite soaring above the oaks. Nathan watched, his heart heavy with questions. "Lily," he said softly, "do the kids at school bother you a lot?" Lily paused, her pencil hovering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "They say I talk funny or I'm too slow. I don't tell you because you're always on your phone." Nathan's throat tightened. He wanted to promise it would change, that he'd be there, but the words felt hollow against years of absence. His phone rang. Emily, his ex-wife. He hesitated, then answered. "Nathan, what's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. "Lily's teacher called me. She's been upset at school, but she won't talk about it." Nathan glanced at Lily, who was focused on her drawing, unaware of the conversation. "I'm handling it," he said, his voice low. "I'm trying." Emily sighed, her tone softening. "Trying isn't enough, Nate. She needs you, not your money. Don't lose her." The call ended, and Nathan sat in silence, Emily's words echoing Clara's. He looked at Lily, her head bent over her sketch, and made another decision. "Hey, kiddo," he said, "you love drawing, right? What if we did it together? Maybe a class or something?" Lily's eyes widened. her smile hesitant but growing. "You'd draw with me?" she asked. Nathan nodded, his mind already racing with how to make it happen. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. Clara's words, Lily's drawings, Emily's warning. They all pointed to the same truth: his daughter needed him to show up not just today, but every day. As the Savannah sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Nathan felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real, that he could be the father Lily deserved. The Telfair Academy, a grand neoclassical building in Savannah's historic district, glowed softly under the late morning sun, its white columns and arched windows a testament to the city's storied past. Inside the art studio buzzed with quiet energy as a dozen children and a handful of adults gathered for a Saturday community art class. Lily Harper, her dark blonde hair tied back with a green ribbon, sat at a long table, her sketchbook open, her small hands moving with purpose as she painted a watercolor of a heron, its wings spread against a backdrop of marsh grass. Nathan Caldwell sat beside her. His tie loosened his sleeves, rolled up a paintbrush in hand that looked comically small in his grip. His canvas was a mess of greens and blues, an attempt at a forest that resembled a child's finger painting more than anything deliberate. But his eyes, usually sharp with the focus of a tech mogul steering a billion-dollar company, were soft, fixed on Lily's careful brush strokes. For the first time in years, Nathan felt unmoored from the relentless pull of his phone, which lay silent in his pocket. The memory of that morning at Magnolia Cafe 3 weeks ago, Clara Thompson's gentle but piercing words, Lily's tearful confession about the bullies still lingered, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to losing his daughter to his own distraction. He glanced at Lily, her face alight with concentration, and felt a quiet pride. She was teaching him something not just about art, but about presence, about seeing the world through her eyes. The art teacher, Ms. Evelyn, a wiry woman with silver-streaked hair and a penchant for vibrant scarves, moved between the tables offering encouragement. "Lily, that heron is stunning," she said, leaning over to admire the girl's work. "You've captured the way the light hits the feathers." Lily beamed her cheeks, flushing with a joy Nathan hadn't seen in months. He realized with a pang how rarely he'd noticed her small triumphs, her ability to create beauty despite the challenges of her autism, the way she poured her heart into every line and color. "What do you think, Dad?" Lily asked, turning her canvas toward him. Nathan studied the painting, the heron's elegance a stark contrast to his own clumsy attempt. "It's incredible, kiddo," he said, his voice thick. "You're way better at this than me." Lily giggled, a sound that warmed the room, and for a moment Nathan forgot the looming merger with Apex Dynamics, the emails piling up, the board members whispering about his recent unreliability. He dipped his brush into a pot of yellow paint, trying to add sunlight to his forest, and laughed when it smeared into a muddy streak. Lily reached over, guiding his hand. "You have to go slow, Daddy," she said, her tone serious but kind. Nathan nodded, letting her lead, marveling at how his 9-year-old daughter had become his teacher. Back at Magnolia Cafe, the lunch rush was in full swing, the clatter of plates and chatter of customers filling the air. Clara Thompson moved through the tables, her apron pocket still holding the turtle doodle Lily had left behind weeks ago. She'd thought of the little girl, often wondering if Nathan had taken her words to heart. The cafe felt different today, though a reporter from the Savannah Morning News, a young man named Daniel with a notepad and a curious smile, sat at the counter sipping coffee and asking questions. He'd overheard Marla Clara's co-worker talking about the incident with Lily and the bullies, and now he wanted the story. So Clara Daniels said, scribbling notes, "You stepped in for this girl when no one else did. What made you do it?" Clara paused, wiping her hands on a rag, her hazel eyes distant. "I've got a son, Jacob," she said. "He's got epilepsy, had it since he was little. I know what it's like to see your kid hurt and feel helpless. That girl, Lily, she needed someone to see her." Daniel nodded his pen, moving quickly. "This could be a big story," he said. "A small act of kindness in a place like this. It resonates." Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what felt right," she said, turning to refill a customer's iced tea. But Daniel's story, published the next day under the headline, "The Heart of Savannah, a Waitress's Stand for a Child," went viral, shared across social media, picked up by local blogs, even mentioned on a national morning show. Letters began arriving at the cafe, addressed to the kind waitress, or simply Lily's friend, filled with messages of support for Lily, drawings from other kids, even small donations for autism advocacy groups. Clara, embarrassed, but touched, taped the drawings to the wall behind the counter, turning the cafe into a gallery of kindness. Nathan, unaware of the growing buzz, was grappling with his own challenges. The art class had been a revelation, but back at his office that week, the pressure was mounting. Apex Dynamics was threatening to pull out of the merger unless Nathan could guarantee a face-to-face meeting by Friday. His CFO, a sharp-tongued woman named Vanessa, had called him twice, her voice laced with frustration. "Nathan, you've missed 3 meetings this month," she said during their last call. "The board's talking about a vote of no confidence. You need to get back in the game." Nathan had paced his office, a glass-walled space overlooking the Savannah River. His mind split between Lily's smile at the art class and the ticking clock of his company's future. He'd promised Lily he'd be there not just for one day, but consistently, but the pull of his old life was strong. He thought of Clara, her quiet strength, the way she'd looked at him when she said Lily's heart needed care. He remembered a story she'd shared that morning at the cafe about missing Jacob's first seizure because she was working a late shift, the guilt that had haunted her ever since. "I thought I was providing for him," she'd said, her voice steady but raw. "But he needed me, not the money." Nathan had nodded, the words cutting deeper than he'd expected. He didn't want to be that parent, the one who looked back in 20 years and realized he'd missed everything that mattered. That evening, Nathan picked Lily up from school, noticing the way her shoulders hunched as she climbed into the SUV. Her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "How was school?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Lily shrugged her eyes on the window. "Okay," she said, but her voice was flat, the same tone she'd used at the cafe when she admitted the bullying. Nathan pressed gently. "Did something happen?" Lily hesitated, then spoke, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "The kids at lunch said I'm too loud when I hum." They moved to another table. "I didn't mean to bother them." Nathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, anger and guilt warring inside him. He thought of the boys at the cafe, the way Clara had shut them down with a look and a few words. He wanted to be that person for Lily, but he didn't know how. "You're not a bother," he said, his voice firm. "You're you, and that's perfect." Lily looked at him, her green eyes searching as if testing whether he meant it. He reached over, squeezing her hand. "How about we paint again tomorrow? Just us at home." Lily's face brightened. A small nod, her only reply, but it was enough. The next day, Clara was sorting through the pile of letters at the cafe when Nathan and Lily walked in, both carrying small canvases from their art class. Lily ran to Clara, her excitement bubbling over. "Miss Clara, look!" she said, holding up her painting of the heron, now framed with a simple wooden border. "We finished it." Clara knelt to Lily's level, her smile wide. "This is gorgeous, sweetheart," she said, tracing the heron's wings with her finger. "You're a real artist." Nathan stood behind his own canvas, a slightly improved forest scene tucked under his arm. "She's teaching me a thing or two," he said, his voice lighter than Clara had ever heard it. She noticed the change in him, the way his shoulders were less tense, his eyes less distracted. But she also saw the strain, the way his phone buzzed in his pocket, ignored but persistent. "You're doing good, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone encouraging but pointed. "But it's not a one-day thing. Kids like Lily, they need you every day." Nathan nodded, his expression sober. "I'm trying," he said. "It's harder than I thought, but I'm trying." That night, Nathan sat in his study, the letters from the cafe spread across his desk. Lily had brought them home, insisting he read them. One was from a mother in Atlanta whose son had autism and loved to draw just like Lily. Another was from a teacher praising Lily's courage and Clara's kindness. Nathan felt a lump in his throat, realizing how many people had been touched by his daughter's story, a story he'd almost missed. His phone lit up with a text from Vanessa Apex, meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Non-negotiable. Nathan stared at the screen, then at Lily's heron painting now hanging on his wall. He thought of Clara's story about Jacob, the missed seizure, the years of regret. He typed a reply, "Reschedule for next week. Family emergency." Then he turned off his phone, a small act of defiance against the life that had kept him from Lily for too long. He didn't know if he could keep this up, if he could balance his company and his daughter. But for the first time, he was willing to try. At the cafe, Clara closed up the last of the letters taped to the wall. The reporter Daniel had stopped by again, promising a follow-up story about the community's response. Clara didn't care much for the spotlight, but she hoped it would help Lily, maybe even reach other kids who felt alone. As she locked the door, she thought of Jacob, who'd called that morning to check in. His voice steady, his life proof that love could heal what neglect had broken. She hoped Nathan would find that truth before it was too late, that he'd see Lily's heart and hold it close. The Savannah night was quiet, the stars bright above the city, and Clara felt a flicker of hope that this story, Lily's, Nathan's, even her own, was far from over. The Magnolia Cafe was alive with color and chatter. On a warm Saturday afternoon in early December, its walls transformed into a vibrant gallery for a community art showcase. Clara Thompson stood behind the counter, her apron swapped for a simple navy dress, her graying hair loose for once, framing her face with a softness that matched the pride in her hazel eyes. The idea for the showcase had come to her weeks ago, inspired by the flood of letters and drawings that had poured in after the Savannah Morning News article about her stand for Lily Harper. The cafe's usual checkered linoleum and worn booths were now adorned with artwork, sketches, paintings, and collages from local children, many of whom, like Lily, lived with disabilities that made them feel different, but whose creativity shone like a beacon. Clara had spent late nights organizing the event, convincing local businesses to donate supplies and rallying her co-workers to help set up. The wall behind the counter, once home to just a few of Lily's doodles, now displayed dozens of pieces, including a large canvas at the center, a collaborative mural by Lily and her father, Nathan Caldwell, depicting a vibrant Savannah marsh, alive with herons, turtles, and splashes of color that seemed to dance in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Clara watched the crowd, family's neighbors, even a few curious tourists mingle, and admire the art, their voices blending with the soft jazz playing from a speaker in the corner. She felt a deep satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing she'd helped spark something bigger than herself, something that might make kids like Lily feel seen. Lily, now 10, stood near her mural, her dark blonde hair tucked behind a headband, her green eyes bright with excitement. She wore a yellow dress with paint flecks on the hem, a testament to her hours spent creating with Nathan. She held a small stack of postcards, each printed with one of her drawings, which Clara had arranged to have made as keepsakes for the event. Miss Clara Lilly called, weaving through the crowd to reach her. "Look, people are taking my cards." She held up a postcard of her heron painting from the Telfair Academy art class, her signature scrawled proudly at the bottom. Clara knelt, her smile wide. "They love your work, sweetheart," she said, brushing a stray curl from Lily's face. "You're a star today." Lily beamed, then darted back to her mural where Nathan stood, his suit replaced by a casual sweater and jeans, a far cry from the tense businessman Clara had met months ago. He was talking to a young couple, explaining the mural's creation. His voice animated, his hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. Clara noticed the ease in his posture, the way his eyes lit up when he looked at his daughter. The transformation was striking, and she felt a quiet pride knowing her words that October morning had planted a seed that had grown into this. Nathan caught Clara's eye and gave her a nod, a silent thank you that carried more weight than words. He'd been coming to the cafe regularly since that day, not just for coffee, but to talk with Clara, to listen to her stories about raising Jacob, her son, with epilepsy. Those conversations had become a lifeline, grounding him as he navigated the challenge of balancing his tech empire with being the father Lily needed. He'd restructured his company, delegating more to his team and working remotely 3 days a week to spend time with Lily. The merger with Apex Dynamics had gone through, but not without cost. Nathan had lost a few board members who didn't trust his new priorities. Yet, to his surprise, the company was thriving, his clearer head and renewed focus leading to better decisions. More importantly, Lily was thriving. She'd started talking more about school, sharing stories of friends she'd made in art club, even mentioning a teacher who praised her creativity. The bullying hadn't stopped. Entirely, kids could be cruel, but Lily seemed stronger, more confident, her sketchbook a shield against the world's harshness. Nathan knew much of that was thanks to Clara, whose small act of kindness had been a wake-up call he couldn't ignore. The showcase had drawn an unexpected crowd, including 3 familiar faces that made Clara pause. The middle school boys who'd mocked Lily that day at the cafe stood near the mural, their expressions sheepish, their hands stuffed in their pockets. The ringleader, the one with the backward cap, approached Lily hesitantly, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Hey, Lily," he said, his voice low, almost inaudible over the crowd. I made this for you." He handed her the paper, a crude but earnest drawing of a turtle, its shell patterned with stars. "I'm sorry about, before." Lily looked at the drawing, then at the boy, her eyes but not unkind. "It's okay," she said softly. "I like your turtle." The boy's face relaxed, a small smile breaking through, and his friends nodded, their own apologies unspoken, but clear in their awkward stances. Clara watched from the counter, her heart swelling. She'd hoped the boys might learn from that day, but seeing them here making amends felt like a small miracle. The article, the letters, the community's response, it had rippled outward, touching even those who'd caused pain. Nathan joined Lily, his expression a mix of surprise and gratitude as he overheard the exchange. He knelt beside her, studying the boy's drawing. "That's a cool turtle," he said, his voice warm. "Thanks for sharing it with us." The boy nodded, then shuffled back to his friends who were already moving toward the exit, their heads ducked, but their steps lighter. Nathan looked at Lily, who was carefully tucking the drawing into her sketchbook. "You handled that well, kiddo," he said. Lily shrugged, her smile shy. "Miss Clara says everyone deserves a second chance," she said, glancing at Clara, who was now pouring lemonade for a group of kids. Nathan followed her gaze, his chest tightening with emotion. He thought of the letters he'd read, the ones from strangers who'd been moved by Lily's story, by Clara's courage. One had come from a father in Charleston, whose daughter also had autism. He'd written about taking her to an art class after reading the article inspired by Nathan's journey. Another was from a grandmother, thanking Clara for reminding her to slow down for her grandkids. Those letters, now stored in a box at home, were a reminder of how one moment could change so much. As the afternoon wore on, the cafe grew crowded, the air thick with laughter and the clink of glasses. Clara had invited a local autism advocacy group to set up a table, and Nathan had quietly donated to their cause, insisting it be in Clara's name. He hadn't told her yet, wanting it to be a surprise, but when the group's director, a warm woman named Sarah, approached Clara with the news, her eyes widened. "Mr. Caldwell, you didn't have to do that," Clara said, her voice thick, as she met Nathan at the mural. Nathan shrugged, his smile almost boyish. "You saved my relationship with my daughter," he said. "It's the least I could do." Clara shook her head, her hand resting on Lily's shoulder. "You did the hard part, Mr. Caldwell. You showed up." Lily tugged at Clara's sleeve, holding up a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "This is for you," she said, her voice bright. Clara unwrapped it carefully, revealing a drawing of the three of them. Clara, Lily, and Nathan standing in front of Magnolia Cafe, the building painted in vivid pinks and blues, Clara with a halo of light around her head. At the bottom, in Lily's careful handwriting, were the words, "Clara, the guardian of kindness." Clara's eyes misted, and she pulled Lily into a hug, her voice catching. "Oh, sweetheart, this is beautiful," she said. "I'll treasure it always." The showcase wound down as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across Abercorn Street. Nathan and Lily stayed until the end, helping Clara stack chairs and pack away leftover postcards. Nathan looked around the cafe, now quiet, its walls still alive with color. "This place is special," he said, his voice low. "You made it that way." Clara smiled, wiping down the counter one last time. "It's just a diner," she said, but her eyes twinkled. "It's the people who make it special." Nathan nodded, his hand resting on Lily's head as she yawned, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. He thought of the past 3 months, the art classes, the kite flying, the quiet evenings spent drawing together. He'd missed a few meetings, lost a few deals, but he'd gained something far more valuable: his daughter's trust, her laughter, her world. He thought of Clara's son, Jacob, whose story had guided him, and of the countless families who'd been touched by the cafe's story. "You know," he said, "I used to think success was about building something big, a company, a legacy. But you showed me it's about this." He gestured to Lily, to the drawings on the wall, to the community that had gathered today. "This is what matters." As they stepped outside, the Savannah night was cool, the stars bright above the city's oaks. Lily held Nathan's hand, her steps light, her voice bubbling with plans for their next art project. "A painting of the cafe," she said, with Clara as the hero. Nathan laughed, promising to make it a Tuesday tradition, their art day now a sacred part of their week. Clara watched them go, her heart full. She thought of Jacob, of the years she'd spent at this diner, of the small moments that had added up to a life of meaning. She locked the door, the drawing from Lily tucked carefully in her bag, a reminder that kindness, however small, could change everything. The cafe stood quiet, its windows glowing softly, a beacon of hope in a world that needed it. Clara knew she'd see Lily and Nathan again, their bond stronger, their story far from over. And as she walked home under the starlit sky, she felt the deep satisfaction of knowing she'd made a difference, one heart, one family, one drawing at a time.